historical of human perspective.
Welcome to Unbiased and on the Fence. It's Paranormal Frequencies, and we are joined with our guest, Rob Shelsky. Why don't you talk us in, tell us about Rob? Sherry,
Hey,
are you there?
everybody.
Hey.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay. All right. So, Rob Shelsky is an avid and eclectic writer of both fiction and nonfiction. He averages about 4,000 words a day. Rob, with a degree in science, has written a large number of factual articles for the former AlienSkin Magazine, as well as for other magazines such as Doorways, Midnight Street, Internet Review of Science Fiction, and many others. While at AlienSkin Magazine, a resident columnist there for 7 years, Rob did a number of investigative articles, including some concerning the paranormal, as well as columns about UFOs, including interviews of those who have had encounters with them. Rob's nonfiction books on UFOs include For the Moon is Hollow and Aliens Rule the Sky, Deadly UFOs and the Disappeared, Ancient Alien Empire Megalithia, Darker Side of the Moon, They Are Watching Us, Invader Moon, and more. He also has written books on time travel, including Time Travel Invasion, as well as Mysteries of Time Travel, 35 Cases of Time Travel Intrusion. He also writes science fiction, horror, paranormal, and paranormal romance, as well as historical romance books. He has often and over a long period explored the alien and UFO question and has made investigative trips to research such UFO hotspots as Pine Bush, New York, Gulf Breeze, Florida, and other such regions, including Brown Mountain, North Carolina, known for the infamous Brown Mountain Light, as well as investigating numerous places known for paranormal activity. With over 20 years of such research and investigative efforts behind him, as well as he's currently being a field investigator for MUFON, author Rob Shelsky is well qualified in the subject of UFOs, as well as that of the paranormal, where Rob Shelsky tends to be the skeptic and insists upon being able to kick the tires of a UFO to ascertain their reality. He is as well a theorist, constantly coming up with possible explanations for various phenomena. Rob asks the hard questions others seem to avoid. Often he comes up with convincing answers. Rob also writes fiction, including but not limited to science fiction, horror, fantasy, paranormal romances, and more. And he has a trilogy called the Apocrypha Trilogy. I don't want to say it wrong, which includes The God Factor, The Creator Code, and The Babylon Effect. Rob, welcome to the show.
Well, that was quite some introduction. I'm going to have to shorten that bio for you.
Oh, no, I thought it was great.
I really enjoyed being here and talking to you guys.
Oh, man, welcome to the show. I was sitting there thinking, oh, man, there's so many cool things to talk about here, dozens of books, and it's like, where do we start, you know?
Well, pick a topic and we can go with it.
Well, I'd like to hear your Mandela effect experience, because I know you've written about it, and so, yeah, how did you first come across the Mandela effect?
Just in passing, actually. I saw a reference to it, looked it up, started researching it, and then became more and more involved in it because, you know, when you hear all these different things with the Mandela effect, the changes in memory, some of them, of course, apply to you as well, you know, or to me, and that got me going. I thought, well, wait a minute, I do remember this as being different. I do remember that as being different. So then I decided to research it some more, and, of course, psychiatrists, psychologists want to say, oh, it's just false memories. But even they, and they quite willingly admit this, can't understand why it's such a prevalent phenomena, so worldwide, and seems to be the same sort of phenomena no matter which culture, background, race, or nationality we're talking about here. So I began researching even more. And I came up with some physical evidence, as have others. But I came up with some of my own, which I then started writing up in my book as well. And mine concerned images of globes from different movies and television shows throughout the 20th century, late 20th century and early 21st century. So there is actual physical evidence for the Mandela effect. It isn't just false memories as they'd like them to have us believe. And also, there's another thing. When we get it wrong, our memories are wrong. We all get it wrong the same way, or practically all of us. So you might have, a lot of people saying it's Sex and the City, but there are literally tens of thousands of people who remembered it as Sex in the City. And this goes on and on with all these sort of so-called false memories. But also there's actual physical evidence for it in the form of maps, globes, and even physical objects that we've discovered. And apparently it dates back several centuries.
I got to tell you, I had a piece of artwork, Rob, that I had. I used a world map, and I took the word love in like dozens of languages, and I placed it like evenly over the landmass, and I just pulled an image off of the internet. Now this was back in 2011, and it took me literally like a year to take these words and place them right with the continents and everything. When I'd heard the map had changed, I opened it up. Of course, it's like, I don't know, 2017 at this time, and the map I used as a guide that was underneath all the letters no longer lined up with the letters. The file had changed in a miraculous way from the way I left it. It looked like I just completely ignored the continents and areas and stuff like that. So I've got hard evidence. I know, like, that doesn't work for other people, but for me, I was like mind blown that this file that I hadn't opened in years had changed. It wasn't the way I left it. I mean, something
Shocking,
changed.
isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It is. With these images of globes, like from movies and different television shows, there is anyone can see those. They still exist, the changes. Mm-hmm. And everything from I Dream of Jeannie with a globe that is used in the show, to Dazed and Confused, a globe that's used in a classroom in that show, to Friends, season 2, the Bracelet Buddies episode, and even I just discovered another one, the original first episode of the Andrew Griffith Show. There's a globe in Opie's room, and it's wrong too.
Oh, wow.
Now, how these globes that you can actually look up and see for yourself on these shows, just freeze frame it, be wrong? And people say, oh, well, they're keys and logos. Look up closely. There is one show, Mad Men, I believe, where I do believe it's a logo. But these others, I freeze-framed it, did it in high definition, looked at it closely. There's rivers, there's mountain ranges, there's all sorts of things. There's islands coming and going all the time. And oddly enough, Australia seems to be a focal point for a lot of this stuff. I don't know why.
Very strange. So now that you've been looking at it,
this is corroborative evidence. Anyone can look this stuff up online and see it for themselves.
Now, I often tell people, Rob, that I'm like, with the Mandela effect, you can't really take someone's word for it. You have to sort of get in there and look at things until you find something that you know is one way, but apparently it never existed that way, because it's just too much for the brain you can't wrap your head around it until you see it happening. And then even still then, it's like, what's going on here? It's just mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing in several different ways, because a lot of it seems to revolve around islands, although landmass has changed too, large ones, continents. But with the islands, it's particularly bizarre because, for instance, in the I Dream of Jeannie episode I'm referring to, on the globe is a clear image of a large island off the southwest tip of South America. There is no island like that there. If you look at it, it shows mountains, it shows a harbor, it shows an inlet. This is definitely not a key or a logo. But what concerns me is if these islands are popping in and out of existence, like large land masses to the west of Australia, islands in the middle of the Pacific, a large landmass in on another globe in the I Dream of Jeannie series that shows a landmass off the coast of Central America in the Pacific, definitely not Hawaii, far too large.
Right.
And also, historically, islands that have existed for years, like High Brazil off of the coast of Ireland on maps, and now suddenly no longer exists. Or even Sandy Island down in the South Pacific, which just disappeared a couple of years ago. It was on maps for years. It was cited by multiple ships, different captains, different crews, different countries. It was written up and described, and now all of a sudden it's just gone. And even where the island existed, it's too deep for an island to have ever existed there. It's like 4,000 feet deep.
Wow.
So what the heck is happening? And oh, by the way, that island showed up on a Google map of the Earth. It was pixelated out, but the shape of the island's there. It's blacked out, which they only usually do with government installations or government, secret facilities at the request of those governments. But that Google map wasn't a map. It was an actual satellite photograph. And you can look that up, too. This is very bizarre stuff.
So clearly there's evidence, but they try to hide it whenever there's any evidence of the way it used to be. So that's really trippy. I know in that piece of art that I was telling you about, there were literally dozens of new islands that weren't there before. And then there was a couple of spots where there was a wort just above water, like the island was completely gone. But there was places that I'd heard of, like Ibiza in Spain, the island. I'd heard of that place, but apparently it wasn't where it is now. And I mean, there was like major changes that I noticed throughout the whole map, small ones.
And of course, this could go way back. High Brazil has been on maps for 400 years and then suddenly disappeared from them because the island is no longer there, rather large island. But it could go back even further. I mean, this is just speculation on my part, but is Atlantis another example?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, but, and even if you exclude High Brazil, Atlantis, and that sort of stuff, you still have islands by the dozens that were on maps, that were cited, that were described in detail, including the flora and the fauna, which now no longer exist. And this happens a lot. There's one in the Gulf of Mexico, several in the South Pacific, the Atlantic, off the coast of South America. I mean, what's happening? Granted, old maps can be wrong, but when different captains of different ships, and one of them, by the way, was Captain Cook, who basically is credited with having discovered Australia, although he wasn't really the first, and he describes an island that now no longer exists. He was not a stupid man. He was highly intelligent. He led an exploratory and scientific expedition in more than one. These are not fools, these people. So what's happening with these islands? And this is just islands. We're finding coins. We're finding medallions. We're finding oop art from different periods from other times that we can't account for. And how do we explain all of this?
Exactly. Yeah. So do you think there's something happening in a supernatural sort of way?
I'm not really sure what the cause is. I have my suspicions. There could be a number of different causes. For one thing, it could be time travelers. I know that sounds a little crazy, but if they come back and change time, Stephen Hawking said, well, it's our time travelers. Where are they? Why aren't they showing up in little silver suits and silver sunglasses? Well, maybe they are showing up, and when they do show up, they alter time, and it changes the timeline. So we don't see the time travel. We see the effects of the time travelers. They might be doing it on purpose, or we might be existing in a simulation, that Matrix idea. So some physicists say there's a 35% chance we do live in a simulation, which is pretty scary when you think about it. So if someone's tweaking the program, things could come and go, and there could be unexpected glitches like islands disappearing. I keep referring to the islands because that bothers me almost more than anything else. People had to have lived on these islands. In several different shows from several different decades on television, the globes in the background show large land masses off the coast of Western Australia that aren't there. One of them was about the fifth the size of Australia. So if this land mass has suddenly disappeared, what happened to all the people that were on these islands or land masses? Where are they? We don't remember them. We could have had brothers, sisters, cousins, mothers, fathers, friends, and now they suddenly vanish, but they don't just vanish from our timeline. They vanish from our memory. It's as if they never existed at all. And that bothers me more than anything. It's one thing to remember a dear one that's dead. At least you have the memory. but what if we're losing loved ones and we don't even remember they ever existed? That's scary
that's
to me.
strange. Yeah, and I've heard of that. I've heard of like this one guy, YouTuber, was talking about he had neighbors that were they were twins. One that was like out of work, one that was in school or something, and then all of a sudden there wasn't any twins anymore. There was just one girl, and they had no. He mentioned something about her sister, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" And for them, it's always just been the one girl now. But he distinctively remembers twins living there. So, yeah, that's pretty trippy. But they didn't miss her.
Well, he could have been seeing double, or maybe should check their basement for bodies. Right. I mean, there's always other explanations for these things, but there's just so much of it that you can't help but wonder at the preponderance of the evidence. There's the case of Lorena Garcia. She woke up one morning. Her apartment was ever so slightly different in minor details. Didn't think too much of it. Went to work. They said, no, you don't work in this department. You work on the other side of the building. She knew them. She didn't know the people on the other side of the building. She talked to her sister. Her sister tried to explain that everything was okay. She no longer was with her new boyfriend of 7 months. She was back with her old boyfriend, who she'd broken up with, she thought 7 months before. She hired a private detective. He couldn't find no trace of this other guy, which she thought she was with now, or his son. It's as if they never existed. She went to a psychiatrist because she was afraid she was losing her mind. And the psychiatrist said, no, other than these odd hallucinations, you're perfectly sane. And in desperation, she's turned to the internet now, and she's posted an ad saying, if anyone knows anything about any of these people or any of this, please contact me. She's absolutely desperate, and she's not faking it.
Wow. So it's like she's got missing people, but it appears like they've never existed.
Right. It's as if she woke up in a different timeline, one slightly different from her own, where minor things had changed, also including people.
Yeah, and her boyfriend it's like she never met him, and that's weird, man.
Right. She was back with the jerk she had broken up with from 7 months earlier. And more other stuff, too. Her sister, she remembered her sister having an operation a few months before, and to her shoulder, and there was a scar. And she said, no, I never had that operation. And she showed her, and there was no scar. This would freak you out, because you'd wonder if you were going insane or what had happened to you. And by the way, she's not alone. There are literally hundreds of these cases, hundreds. And this is what's amazing me, again, the sheer preponderance of the evidence. Not to mention we keep digging up strange stuff we can't account for. Not too long ago, a couple of years ago, a finger watch was dug up inside of a Chinese tomb that dated back 400 years. Now, no finger watches existed that far back. This definitely is one, and it's old and it's corroded, and it was dug up inside the tomb. It was very reputable Chinese scientists who insist that it's true, and they found it. And there's photographs of it on the internet. You can see them. And this watch even has the word Swiss written on the back of it. Swiss watch.
What?
Now, they didn't even have watches at all back 400 years ago. All they had were very, very large clocks, and certainly not a wrist, a finger watch. And this sort of stuff is they're referred to as UPARTs. It's objects found in places where they shouldn't be in that time. Mm-hmm. And we found stuff like that. We have found handbells dug up out of lumps of coal, vases, kettles, ladles, all sorts of stuff, hammers, you name it, they've dug it up. And this has gone back for 3 centuries, people finding it in quarries and coal mines. One object was found at the bottom of a coal mine in a seam of coal that dated back 26 million years. So how do we account for this stuff? A coin was found in Mexico City not long ago. On it, it's very faded and worn. They dug it up at a construction site, and on it says Nueva Alemania, New Germany. And it has the Nazi insignia, and the date on it, I believe, is 2030 is what they make out.
Oh, wow.
2030. Yeah. So now there was a small little tiny town of about 5 people called Nueva Alemania, but history doesn't show that they ever made any coins or had any Nazi insignia or anything of the sort. So they're wondering where this coin came from. Ford struck a medallion for a World's Fair, and it had the little curlicue on the crosshatch of the F. Mm-hmm. And they say that they've always had that ever since it began. Well, a man has actually showed, and you can see a picture of it again on the internet for yourself, and it shows a medallion from that same fair without the curly Q and the F. And yet Ford insists they never did two versions of that medallion.
Right. Wow, I'd love to see that one.
Yeah, it's, well, actually, it's in my book, a picture of it, I believe. I think. It's been a while since I wrote that book. But yeah, this goes on and on and on. So is the Mandela effect real? Yes. If someone pointed a gun at my head and said, is it real or not? Your life depends on it. I would have to say yes.
Yeah,
and I'd
same
hope
here.
I'm still alive at it.
Me too.
Yeah. And what's the cause of it? Could be anything. Could be CERN. It could be quantum computers, which I lean towards. It could be that we're in a simulation. It could be time travelers. Someone is messing with us, either purposely or by accident, and we're reaping the whirlwind, so to speak. And it's scary.
See, I think...
It is. And you know what gets me? Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it seems like it's being affected from the outside, you know, because of the way the way it seems to have just the timeless effect, you know. What's that word for it? Retrocausality?
Yes, retrocausality. And by the way, we actually have evidence now for sure that retrocausality exists on the quantum level. We have run experiments where after the experiment has been done, they change the cause, and the effect then changes accordingly, but after the experiment has already been completed. This is true on the quantum level. Plus, we have found that the quantum level, which we thought was safely in the world of the very, very tiny, actually exists on our level as well. Scientists developed what they call a quantum drum. It's very small, but it can be seen with the naked eye. Now, this quantum drum vibrates, and they have proven that it can exist in two separate states at the same time. It's called superposition. Mm-hmm. Now, this is something the eye can see. We thought this was impossible. We thought that quantum effects like that only existed on the truly microscopic scale, the subatomic level. Now we find that they actually can exist in our macro world. And we are made up of particles. We are made up of molecules, which are made up of atoms, which are made up of subatomic particles, and all of those subatomic particles have these quantum effects of superposition. So we are the cumulative effect of all those particles that make us up. So if they're all behaving in two states at once, and we're made up of all those particles, does it affect us on this level? Can people accidentally step into an alternate reality? Do we live in a world that is just probabilities and with likelihood outcomes, but not always the same? Is the world we live in not really real at all? I mean, these are all questions that they're asking now.
Yeah, and I think the simulation thing really, I'm sorry, Sherry, I keep cutting you off. The simulation thing that he brought up, though, is huge. But go ahead.
Well,
no, I was just going to say that there was just one thing I wanted to tell Rob real quick. Did you hear about that guy that he came home and there was like a puddle of water in front of his sink, so he wanted to like fix the plumbing. So he opens the cabinet and he crawls in and he keeps crawling and crawling and crawling, and all of a sudden he comes out on the other side in a yard or something, and there's himself old, and they have like the same tattoo on their arm and everything. And so he decides to take his iPhone out of his pocket and film him with himself. Have you heard that story? Because I know you're good at knowing what is.
Yes, I have, and that's the hoax. That was the hoax. It was actually
done.
Yeah, it was actually done as a commercial or an advertisement for something, and I think it was done in Norway or Sweden, one of those two places. But yeah, that sounded really cool, and I did see the video of it. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And then, of course, I did some checking through Snopes and elsewhere. And, yeah, it was just it was not meant to be a mean hoax. It was just meant to be a hoax to try to sell something. I don't remember what it was, but, yeah, that wasn't true. However, there is a case where a guy was betting in England that he could run really fast, bragging. So his friends put him up to it with a bet, and they didn't trust him, so they decided to follow him in a horse and cart along the dirt road. They were well within sight of him, just a few yards behind him, when he suddenly tripped on the route. He fell forward, and he let out a piercing scream and disappeared. he was never seen or heard from again. Now, this is a well-documented one. It had a number of witnesses. It's written up, and you can find it quite readily. He just literally fell into oblivion. And this has happened a lot, too, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
Where did he go? They stopped. There was no hole in the road. I mean, it wasn't a perfect road, because it wasn't paved, but it certainly was no hole. He was in plain sight. There was nothing around to obstruct him that he could have ducked behind. They simply couldn't find him, and they never found him again. No sign of him ever. And this has happened with other people. An old man disappeared off his front porch in England. He had been put out there. He couldn't walk. His family had carried him out there. It was near sunset, a nice day. There were some laborers nearby, very close by, well within sight of him. And she came out to bring him in, and he had disappeared. They never found him again. They did find a body a number of years later, and they thought that might have been him, but it turned out to be that of a woman. So it wasn't him. But no, they never heard from him again. This goes on and on and on. We think of them as oddities, anomalies, but if you start adding it up, it's in the thousands. So what's happening with these people?
What about the one we heard about not too long ago? It seems like it was from upstate New York, and then the guy disappeared on a ski trip and appeared out in California or something like a few days later in the same ski clothes.
Oh, right.
That
was interesting, too, yeah. And he showed up in California, didn't have any idea how he got there, had no passport, no papers of any sort that would have allowed him into the country, and no idea where he had been for several days. And they took him back. But yeah, it was quite a mystery. He was skiing, and the last thing he remembers was skiing in Canada, and then all of a sudden he's out in the Southwest and had no idea how he got there. And they don't know how he could have gotten across the border without any kind of documentation.
Now, if something like that happened to the guy that, that fell, and maybe he just ended up somewhere in a remote location where there was no one around and ended up ended up out in the middle of the ocean or anything. Who's to say where you pop out if you fall into one of these, I don't know, what is it, like a wormhole or something, you think? Or
I don't know if it's a wormhole or what it is. A wormhole theoretically should be much too small to allow a human being to pass through it. Mm-hmm. And also theoretically would need negative energy in order to maintain their opening, which we have yet to develop, and we may never be able to. So I'm not sure what the causality is. But It does happen. There was the case of several young women who were at a college up in Utah, and they decided to go on a short trip, but they had to get back to their college before 10 because at that time you were locked out and you'd be in a lot of trouble if you didn't make it back to your dorm within a certain time, especially women. So there were, I believe, 3 of them. They went on the trip. They were coming back. All of a sudden the road started to look funny to them. It went from being paved to concrete, and they didn't remember doing that. And they followed it, and it was a sharp turn that they didn't remember before. They followed it, and the whole road dead-ended at the face of a cliff. So thinking they made a wrong turn, they backed up and went back to the main road and went on it again, although it wasn't as wide or as big as the concrete road. And they noticed the countryside had changed dramatically, what they were looking at. There were fields with crops and things which they hadn't seen on the way there. So they figured they were truly lost. So they saw a tavern on the right up ahead, so they pulled into it. And the driver said, why don't you call out to those, she saw 3 men standing with their backs to him talking apparently by the door. Why don't you call to them and get some information? So the one girl yelled out through the window of the passenger car, out of the side of the car and said, hey, and then all of a sudden she stopped dead and she yelled at the driver, drive, get out of here, drive. So the driver took off because the girl was in an obvious panic. And when they got back on the highway, they saw this odd-shaped or egg-shaped vehicle coming out of the driveway after them. And it chased them. All of a sudden, it disappeared, and the road went back to the normal tarmac, and things looked normal again. Then the driver asked her friend, why did you scream like that? She says, they weren't human.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and by the way, that road had a reputation, long-standing reputation, for being haunted. Haunted or paranormal, I'm not sure if there's a difference, but yeah. And again, you had 3 people involved, so are all these people lying? I don't know. I don't believe so.
Neither.
However, if they were high on drugs, they had one heck of a trip because that's of a story. Now, this sounds like they went to a completely different timeline. Some people think they went to the future. I have a feeling they went to a timeline where humans evolved differently. They went, quite a way.
Yeah, I
So,
imagine you could make parallel moves and it would still, if things were developed at different times, it could look quite different.
well, quantum
I
theory
like
now
that.
seems to demand that we have parallel timelines and literally an infinity of them. So you must have an infinity subset of you where you've lived, become a billionaire, become the Pope, died young, was never born, and so on. But there must be, according to quantum physics now, it almost has to be that way, and that every possibility has to play out. There has to be a timeline for every possibility. And that's pretty amazing. And also the inflation theory of the Big Bang demands multiple universes too, the multiverse. So no matter how you look at it, parallel timelines or parallel universes do seem to exist, according to most of the major theories in science and physics now, whether you're talking about cosmology or you're talking about particle physics.
Well, what's neat about this is I can ask you if you've heard of them and if they were a hoax. But there was a neat one that I'd heard about where there was like a grandmother and the grandson, and they were like up in the bedroom of the house, and all of a sudden the grandson like noticed his grandmother was like looking outside, like freaked out, and he looked outside and everything looked like it did back when there was like horse and buggies and like like the little saloon and all that stuff, and it was like they were there was this alternate reality right outside of the window. And I want to say that they whenever it stopped, they were like discussing, wondering if they would have jumped out the window, would they have been stuck there, And then one more really quick was there was a couple that was driving somewhere, and they stopped at like a bar to like get a drink and go to the bathroom, and there was a picture on the wall of the bar, and the bartender was in the painting, and he was also the bartender that was behind the bar, and had like a old jukebox thing and all this stuff. Well, so they went to where they were going, and then when they came back, they decided to stop there again because they liked it, and when they went, it was totally shut down and like old and falling apart, and there was nothing there.
Well, there's a similar one to
that?
that. It was a group of 4 people, and I haven't heard that one in particular, but this one sounds very much like it. It was a foursome from England. They took a trip in France, driving, and they were heading to southern France, and on the way, they went through this village and then passed it, and they saw signs for circus coming, and the circus was very old, and they commented on the fact that, the French were really behind. They still have to have these old circuses. They found an inn. It had a bar. They stopped at it. While they were there having a drink, 2 gendarmes came in, French police, and they were wearing capes. And one of the couple, members of one of the couples said, "That's funny, I didn't know they still wore capes. I thought those went out of fashion about 18 years ago." So they went up to their bedrooms. They didn't have a phone. There was no television. It was very old-fashioned, but neat. And by the way, the prices were incredibly cheap. They were paying in French francs at the time. So they spent the night and they left. And then on the way back from the south of France, they thought, well, that was a nice place in the country, very quaint. Let's go there again. So they went through the village, saw the signs about the circus, and traveled up the road. Never could find the inn. It was as if it had never existed. They backtracked and repeatedly tried to find it. It had been on the same highways the village was on, and it just wasn't there. It was gone. Now, that's 4 people who make that claim. I don't like to go with just one person. I like to do it where it's multiple people because then you have witnesses.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That almost sounds like a breakdown in the Matrix, doesn't it?
I'm wondering if all this stuff is glitches in the Matrix, or if it's the result of time travelers, or if our reality isn't as real as we think it is and it shifts. Maybe we're not standing on solid ground. Maybe we're standing on sand and it shifts beneath our feet.
Are you familiar with the... I'm sorry. Are you familiar with the JFK Mandela effect?
Yes, I am, actually. I'm pretty much up on all of those. I distinctly remember there only being 4 people in that car, not 6.
Okay. Okay, that's the one that I always come back to when I'm thinking about the whole thing with time travelers, and because that car is a custom car now that didn't exist before, and it's like
right.
It was a stock car before. Well, I don't know about stock, but it wasn't like this was a special car. You can't buy another one of them. That was like specially modified for that event or for the president.
Well, it was bulletproof, and it have a bulletproof top to it, but JFK insisted that the top be not on the car or put down because he wanted not to appear afraid to the people of Dallas.
Right.
And that's the
that
way I
little
remember.
crossbar wasn't there before.
Right. And I do remember, I remember that there was another couple in the car. I believe it was Connolly. Might have that wrong. The governor or something of Texas and his wife, Jackie Kennedy and John Kennedy. And, of course, there was a driver and some Secret Service running along the side of the car. But the number of people seems to have changed. And I, for the life of me, can't figure out how that's possible. But you look at pictures now, and they're different from what I remember. And I was alive when that happened. I was very young, but I remember seeing it on TV over and over for days. They played, you know how they do that? They played over and over and over. So it was burned into my memory. So even though I was quite young, I remember the images. And I would swear that it was a different number of people in that car than what there is now. And this goes on with so many things. Is someone altering our reality? Are they tailoring the future? Do they want a specific outcome? Are they, or are we in a matrix and some programmer is modifying certain aspects of it and there's unintended glitches? Or are they deliberate? Are we being played with? Are we just some video game, some elaborate video game set up by people in the far future and they tweak it every now and then? I'm not sure what the reason is, but something is going on. And there seems to be tangible, physical evidence that it's going on. And therefore, it behooves us to try to find the answer.
Well, I was just wondering about the time traveler. Whenever I think about it, that would be the one that would be the most difficult for, it seems like, a time traveler to go back and modify something to bring about what we see with the whole JFK thing. With the, there's a whole different car that exists now that didn't exist before. There's different occupants in the car, and I just did a video not too long ago that was showing how the police transcripts originally showed how Governor Connolly's wife wasn't with him and she was being flown in from Austin into Dallas. But that makes no sense anymore because she was right by his side apparently in this current version of reality. But that's always the one.
I remember her being in the car. Did you know that there are even documents in the CIA that oppose each other completely on certain historical events?
No, really, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, under the Freedom of Information Act, they're now available, and you can access them. And there are documents that have two complete different historical versions of the same event, different outcomes.
Oh, that's so wild.
I think what gives
so why would
me the most is that
archives. These are just documents stored in our archives. Why would you have two completely different versions of the same event? That's a historical fact, supposedly. And why would they? I mean, it boggles the mind as to why that would be there. I mean, why would you bother writing up something for the CIA that's supposed to be factual and have two completely different and opposing versions of the same event, and then save them? It's not like they were plotting something or planning something. It's like an after-the-fact appraisal of an event that took place. So I can't countenance how that could be or why that should be. But with the CIA, who knows?
Yeah. I think...
I was going to say with the Mandela effect, though, like, it's so weird because you have, there's artwork, there's human anatomy, the map thing you mentioned, and of course, like the logos and the different things like that. And my daughter had noticed, this is something I wanted to tell you too, is that like the letters on certain products and stuff are like extending. And the best example that I know to give of this is like on Tonka truck on the logo, the capital T is now extended to the right, the line at the top, and it goes all the way and hooks like to the top of the K. And I literally watched this like move. And it's just there's so many different, it goes into like every area of, if there's not someone that's interested in one subject, well, there's another subject where the Mandela effect an example that'll come into play or whatever. But one thing I wanted to tell you, Rob, and I'm telling you, all I can say is that I'm telling you the truth, okay? I had I had a sink in our house, and one day my daughter, well, at 3 in the morning, she woke me up, and she was freaking out. And all of a sudden, our sink had a logo on it, and the logo was called Langzing. It was spelled Lanxing. And I made a little YouTube video about it, and then the people in the comments came in and were saying stuff like that the meaning of that broke down was indiscriminate punishment. And it really kind of freaked me out. And then I decided to look on my own, and if you separate it and you have like land and XING, the land part meant like blue or indigo, and the XING part meant things like to spiral upwards and to go to just like a lot of different things that were positive. So I chose to keep that as what it meant. But then one time, it's going to sound really crazy, I was like waking up and I heard like a woman that sounded kind of like a movie announcer say alien crossing, like LAN. So she was saying alien. She was trying to tell me that that's what it like stood for, and then the X and then the ING. It was really odd because, it's on that property where I saw the UFO that I had told you about before. And I don't know, it's just really weird, but I'm just telling you that the people in the comment section looked up the brand, and it does not exist. And I have 3 sinks in my house with that logo.
That's pretty
Well,
crazy.
that's bizarre. And almost inexplicable.
I know, right?
Yeah, it is.
I
yeah.
know. It's
and this
scary.
is the bizarre thing. Almost everyone has a story that they can tell you in relation to this stuff. What gets me is, it's like with UFOs. They say, well, the majority of Americans now believe in UFOs, but for years, anytime I brought the subject with anyone, oh, you investigate UFOs, I saw blah, blah, blah. Everyone has a story about a UFO that they've seen or their mother saw or some of their immediate family saw that they trust. And I said, well, did you ever report it? Well, no. And I can't blame it, because I actually saw what I'm pretty sure was a UFO over Greensboro, and I was a field investigator for MUFON at the time, and my state director said, well, did you report it, Rob? I said, no, I didn't. She said, why not? I said, well, there's thousands and thousands of these things every year. What's one more example of someone seeing a UFO? And also I'm a field investigator. I really don't want to get that involved. I'm crossing the line there by then reporting seeing a UFO,
Yeah.
But I wanted to keep it as objective as possible. But yeah, I saw one, and it's not a flying saucer. It was just a silvery orb that was jerking around the sky on a bright blue day at about 10:40 in the morning as I was driving north into Greensboro, North Carolina. And at first I thought it was a jet. You know how you might be dipping in and out of a cloud, but I stopped at a light for about a minute or so, and I watched it the entire time, and it was no jet. It was no helicopter, and it was way too big and too far away to be a drone. So I don't know what the heck it was. I can't tell you what it was, but I can tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't a plane, a helicopter, a dirigible, or a drone. So what was it? And that's we see this stuff. My concern now is we're getting so much data on this stuff. We need to start doing something with it. We need to start massaging this data, looking for parallels, looking for information. We can go on collecting evidence for years to come. And there are tens of thousands, actually millions now, of UFO observations. And we discount about 95% of them in MUFON. But there's that 5% we can't discount that just seem real. And there seems to be solid evidence to back them up. So what are we witnessing? What's in our skies? What's in our oceans? What's going on? And we have to find answers to this. And it's great collecting this data, and we should go on doing it, but we also need to start trying to bring all this information together to try to resolve these issues, try to come up with some solutions.
Do you ever see a time where we're going to have...
They might be interdimensional instead of physical.
Oh, yes. They could be from another time. They could be from future humans or future aliens. They could be interdimensional. They could be from another solar system and another entire galaxy if they've got some special way of traveling we don't know about yet. There's a lot of possibilities. We need to narrow that down and find some answers, because our very lives and future may be at stake. I mean, right now, if I were to see a UFO and it started coming in my direction, I'd run the other way. And I would. And in one of my books, Darker Side of the Moon, They Are Watching Us, I tell people to do exactly that. If you can safely take some video or pictures, do it. But if you feel for any reason they're singling you out and coming in your direction, get the heck out of there. Run, because our past experiences with UFOs show us that they seem to regard human beings as having no rights whatsoever, or not caring about us one way or the other. But they damage us. They damage our property. They damage our homes, our vehicles. They damage livestock. People have gotten sick by them. And a lot more people have died from incidences with UFOs than people realize. There's a lot of cases where people have died. And so my attitude is, I had some people who say, oh, well, that's because they're so far above us, they see us as ants. I said, we're pretty far above ants, but even we have a sense of compassion for them. And they said, well, maybe there are good aliens and bad aliens. And I said, yes, that could well be, that there's more than one species. But how good are the good aliens if they don't stop this sort of thing? I mean, countless cases of injuries, damage to property, death, disruption of life in the form of abductions against people's will and human rights, and performing experiments that amount to torture on them. Currently, they say there's about 1.5 million people who claim this has happened to them. Now, this isn't kind, benevolent space brothers we're talking about. These are creatures who either are immoral or amoral. They just have no sense of morals at all. Or they are implacably evil. And none of those choices appeals to me if I were to run into one of them.
Well, you've written about the moon before. Do you think that's an artificial... What's your take on the, I guess, just kind of briefly touch on, I know you've written a whole book about it, but kind of summarize what we're looking at when we look up at the moon.
Sure. I was on Coast to Coast Radio, and the host, George Noya, asked me what I thought about the hollow moon theory, and I said not much. I put it up there with the flat earth theory, and I left it at that. And then, but it got me interested, so I started looking into it, and I found out that there seems to be a lot of very bizarre things about the moon. Mm-hmm. In fact, one noted scientist said that it's easier to theorize that the moon doesn't exist than that the moon we have does exist. We have all sorts of strange, bizarre anomalies with regard to the moon. NASA commissioned a report back before the first landing on the moon, because and it was based on transient lunar phenomena, and it dated back 500 years. And for 500 years, and the reason I went that far back was that's about the length of time we had any kind of telescope or ability to observe more than with our naked eyes, although it goes back much further, these sightings. But we have seen flashes, blinks, rays, so-called volcanoes. There are no volcanoes on the moon. Flares, tracks across the ground, lights moving across the ground, blue glows. In fact, there's one crater on the moon that has had blue glows inside of it so often they've nicknamed it the Blue Gem. And that was Aristarchus crater. And that's what scientists nicknamed it, not me. They refer to it as the Blue Gem. And even the first astronauts to the moon remarked that one area of the moon seemed to have a blue sparkling glow to the surface. So we've seen mists on the moon, smoke on the moon, streaks on the moon, you name it. And this has gone on for 500 years. And some of these sightings went on for months and months, even a couple of years, as with some of the volcanoes. But the moon is dead. We know of no live volcanoes on the moon at all. There's no tectonic activity that we know of on the moon, so we can't account for that. There's all sorts of bizarre stuff about the moon. There's elements on the moon that shouldn't be there. For instance, it has an abundance of helium-3, which is very, very rare on Earth, and we can't account for that. We can't even account for the moon's origin. Even the impact theory of the Earth being struck and the moon forming out of that doesn't make sense, because the isotopic ratio on the moon shows an identical quality to rocks on Earth, the Earth's mantle. But if it was smacked by a planet the size of Mars, Theia they called it, then there should be an isotopic ratio for debris from that planet on the moon, We have found absolutely. So how do we account for this stuff? So what's going on with the moon? Is it completely hollow? I don't know. It may have just large caverns or lava tubes that are being occupied, but something's going on. Why is the moon's crust thicker on the far side than on the near side? Why do we have these huge dark plains of lava flows on one side of the moon, our side, but not the other? It goes on and on. Why do the top three layers of rock on the moon are reversed in their density? You put a bunch of sand and rock in a glass and shake it up and let it settle. The heaviest stuff goes to the bottom, the lighter stuff on top. But on the moon, as the Apollo 11 astronauts found, the top three layers are reversed, with the densest on top, then the next lightest, and then the next. Mm-hmm. Why do craters on the moon, the very large ones, why are they so shallow and flat when they should be very deep? Why are the small craters on the moon deep but not the large ones? Again, we account for this.
Great questions. Yeah, I've looked at all that too, and it's just... And then the fact that it's always facing us, it's the rotation and the spin and the orbit around the Earth are so exactly matched that it's always facing us the same way. That's just kind of bizarre, too.
Well, the moon is at a perfect distance for it to have not only solar eclipses, but also it does the same as the sun with vernal equinoxes and solstices. Right. Our moon is the moon in the entire solar system, and there are hundreds of moons in our solar system that has solar eclipses, just far enough away to have a perfect solar eclipse. None of the other moons, the mother planet's moons, will do that. Our moon is overly large for its size. Its orbit is too circular. It's almost a perfect circle. Mm-hmm. And only Venus has a more circular orbit. This is highly unusual. Also, the moon's density is too low. We can't account for why the moon is so light. Given its size and its apparent mass, there should be a good deal more mass to it. It should exert a greater gravitational pull on the Earth. It doesn't. When the astronauts left the moon and dropped their command module, or not the command module, but the landing module back down, and the moon rang like a bell, quote unquote. Scientists said it rang like a bell. It wasn't just for a short time, it was for hours, as if, quote unquote, it was hollow. Seismographs on the moon record moonquakes. However, the moonquakes don't seem to go through the center of the moon. As one scientist at NASA put it, either the center is made of some material that won't allow such vibrations to pass through it, or there is no center.
So what about the Earth being hollow? Have you looked into that at all?
I barely touched on that. Again, I kind of put that there with the flat Earth theory, but I'm even revising my opinions about that too, because it never pays to be too certain about anything, because when you start delving into it, there's some strange oddities about that too. Yeah. And someday I may write a book on the hollow Earth, but I promise you I'll never go to the flat Earth theory. You can't fly in a jet and see the curvature of the Earth and think that it's flat. You just can't. And of course, the flat earthers say, oh, well, that's because all the windows of the plane are rigged so that it makes it look curved. I said, well, then how come stuff doesn't look curved when the plane is on the ground? It all looks perfectly normal. It's only when it gets something in. Oh, well, that's because I said, every plane in the world has been secretly rigged to make it look curved to us. Who would go through that expense? Who would have that kind of money? And why would they bother?
Yeah, I've often thought about that and wondered why the emergence of the theory, and thought it does raise a lot of questions, but I think applying them to a theory like the flat Earth is sort of close-ended. You can think of dozens of things that some of the evidence that's used to support it could point to, but because I think it is built upon a lot of evidence that, we've been lied to about a lot of different things, but I don't think it necessarily means that it's... We've
known the Earth around since the time of Aristotle, and even before the Egyptians did. In fact, I even measured the apparent circumference of the Earth and came within less than 1,000 miles as to the circumference of the Earth around the equator. Anybody can do it. It's really easy. You just take a stick and put it on the ground and measure the shadow at high noon, and you have someone do it in some other city at high noon their time, and the difference, the disparity gives you, and if you know the distance, you can quickly calculate the circumference of the Earth. Anyone can do it. It's not a deep, dark secret. So, and also, just recently I saw this video where they bought a $20,000 gyroscope, which is supposed to, and they were going to say that this would prove that that the Earth is flat because it should change, but it won't. Well, it did. So then they tried to put it into a shell of beryllium, and it still did it. So at this point in time, they're kind of stymied. They tried to disprove that the Earth was round, and all they did was kind of prove that it was round. So they said they're going to try another approach, but they haven't done it yet. So that's where the video ended. So, I mean, you can make a conspiracy about anything, but that doesn't mean that some conspiracies aren't true.
Right.
But you have to have an analytical mind, and you have to be a clear thinker, and you have to be willing to ask questions. And if you don't like the answers, then you kind of have to discount that theory.
Yeah. Now I've got to pick your brain about this one, because I've often heard about the Mothman. I know you did some research into it, wrote a book about it. Is it a real thing, or what did you come up with?
It would seem so. First of all, it's worldwide. It
so.
wasn't just in West Virginia there. It is worldwide, and I even investigated in southern England, in Cornwall, because in Cornwall they have what they call the Owl Man. They call it the Owl Man, but it looks, the descriptions are exactly like that of the Mothman. It also has appeared in Azerbaijan and in multiple countries around the world at different times, and it always evokes fear and terror in the people, an unreasonable fear sometimes, I would think, but even so it does. And it also seems to presage, more often than not, some kind of catastrophe. And so many people have seen so many versions of it, and even some photos have been taken that, yes, I think the Mothman is real. What it is, I'm not sure. But the idea that it can see the future and gravitates towards catastrophic events before they happen is seems to be a common factor, common thread. But yeah, I think there's something like the Mothman. I think it's real, and it may be an interdimensional creature.
That's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking.
And the idea that it can see the future isn't so strange, really, if you think about it. I mean, if you lived in a village between two high mountain ranges, you would never know what was on the other side of those mountains. And your day would be short. You'd be in the shadow of either mountain range in the morning and in the evening. And so your viewpoint would be very restricted. But if you climb to the top of those mountain ranges, you could see much farther. Well, that may be how these creatures work with time. We are caught in time itself, but they may be able to see or have a sense of what's coming or what's been. They might sort of exist outside of our timeline to a certain degree. So what we think of as impossible or seeing the future may not be such a weird thing. It may just be a result of the type of physics or semi-dimension or dimension that they come from or live in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're native to this world. But you have to remember, even the Southwest, they refer to the Thunderbirds. They do in the Northeast as well. Other countries talk about these giant birds. And these Mothmen, basically, to primitive peoples and cultures, they have to relate it to what they know. So if they see the owl man, they would think giant bird, especially if it's from a distance. Alexander the Great's historian talks about seeing flying silver shields over the Indus River as Alexander the Great was invading India. And this caused such consternation among his soldiers and troops that they did not want to go any further. Well, Alexander the Great sort of forced them to go a little further, but they didn't stay long, and they left India. And that was right along the Indus River. And it said that these flying shields scared and maddened the war elephants and frightened the soldiers. Now, they call them flying shields because that's what they'd relate it to, whereas we relate what we see, or in the 50s, to saucers of teacups, flying saucers. So it's just a matter of how you see something and then try to interpret it in what you know at that time that exists. And metal silver shields were what they, compared it to. And by the way, these things plunged into the river. And Alexander the Great was supposedly trying to figure out how to get below water level, and actually had some people try to devise some primitive submersible devices so they could, because he wanted to investigate it further. If that's true, I'm not absolutely sure, but it's what one historian of his says.
Well, I think that the Mothman, is like a harbinger type thing, and if they see him, then everybody needs to evacuate. If they would just listen. Do you ever think that?
Well, I would. And by the way, they say once you notice the Mothman, he better not notice you noticing, because then he won't leave you alone. That he will then focus on you. And so if you see a Mothman, act like you don't see him, and then evacuate. But, yeah, it's not like they're...
Well, that's good to know, Rob. I didn't
Yeah,
know.
I don't think that they cause
keep that in
these
mind.
events. I think they just see them coming, so to speak, whereas we can't. We can't see over the next hill, but they can, so to speak. So I think they're more like, well, I don't know, maybe they're just watchers. Maybe they just gather to watch when something's going to happen because they can see it's coming. We would.
Right.
If we saw the Graf Hindenburg about to blow up, or somehow knew it was going to blow up, would we gather to watch the spectacle? I mean, we watch spectacles all the time. If someone can see the future, wouldn't they do the same?
That's very true. So yeah, I remember watching a special before, and there was like a bridge collapse, I believe. It's like a horrific collapse with all these people that died, and the Mothman had showed up before that. What?
West Virginia to Ohio, and I think the name of the town was Mount Pleasant. I want to say Mount Pleasant.
Yep. I want to go there.
Yeah, and the sightings were numerous before the event occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one man died from it. He became so upset by the sightings and the constant, what he called harassment of this Mothman, that he slowly went nuts, and they found him outside dead and frozen in the middle of winter at the base of a tree.
Oh,
and so there's a lot of stuff that goes on with it. And also, before those events occurred, a few weeks, or at least about a week or so before they occurred, a group of children with a monitor were out in the woods,
mm-hmm.
and just off the highway, and they saw what they thought was a UFO. And it was right after this that all this stuff started up. So you want to connect UFOs to it, you can.
What other events, catastrophes, did they show up before the Mothman?
They've shown up before earthquakes. They've shown up before fires. There's even reports, and a photograph, I don't know if it's real or hoax, because these days it's hard to tell, of one of them flying around the Twin Towers just before they went.
Oh, wow.
Wow, I wouldn't doubt it.
So, yeah, it's just, I'm with you. If you see a Mothman, get the heck out of there. You know what I mean? Just go on vacation for a week or two. You know, go away.
Right.
Yeah, but if you see him following you, then you're in trouble. And by the way, in England, in Cornwall, it's the same thing. There was one, they saw a sighting of one, and there was a nasty flood, and lives were lost. And they have seen it flying out of church buildings, flying over a graveyard. And apparently this is long-term. This is not a new phenomenon. In England, the owlman has been around a long time. It dates back at least into the early 1800s, and some say before. But then so do crop circles. We think crop circles, they're just hoaxes. Well, they're far too intricate and far too many of them from them all to be hoaxes. And they also date back to the 1700s. You can see a block cutting of a flattened area of wheat in a circle, and they called it the Devil's Circle. And because in those days they assumed it had to be Satan or demons that did this sort of thing. But it's a block cutting of the actual crop circle. And there's a picture of a cloven-hoofed devil in the image, because that's who they assumed must have done it. And even here where I live in North Carolina, not far away, about 30 miles away, is the Devil's Tramping Ground. The strange flattened area in the woods here, and I've been to it, and I did an article on it. Nothing will grow. And this thing dates back a couple centuries at least. Indians think that thing will grow there because evil warriors were buried there. They aren't. Some people said, it must have been an early colonial thing where they had a grinding mill and the oxen just pounded the area down. No, there was never something like that there. I checked. Others say, it must be something to do with the soil. They've done soil tests. They can't find anything wrong with the soil. But nothing will grow in that circle. And as plants near the edge of the circle, they become stunted and small. And anything right at the edge of the circle dies.
Wow.
Yeah, what causes it? I don't know, but it's there and it's real, and anyone can go see it.
Yeah, Dana said they worked at the Parks and Recreation, was it? Parks Department in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Is that where it was? Okay.
Yes,
That's
Point
nice.
Pleasant. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been about 7 years since
I
I
thought it
read
was
that book.
Mount Pleasant too. That's so
Yeah,
weird. I thought
There's
it
a
was
Mount
another
Pleasant
one.
for
too, yeah.
sure.
There's a Mount Pleasant. That's what I keep doing. I keep
It's a
confusing that.
Mandela effect.
No, I don't think so. No.
Yeah. No, it's been a long time since I researched. And people say, well, in your other book, it's like, which book are we talking about? I have so many books, and
Yeah,
then they'll
you
say,
have, how many do you
writing this.
have?
It's like, yeah, I mean, some of these books date back almost 10 years. So I've written so many books since then. It gets, a little foggy after a while. Of course, once I look it up.
It's just so interesting, though, all the stuff that you have. I was wondering this, though. It made me think of down here in Louisiana, they have a being that's called the Rougarou. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't. There is the Jersey Devil, I think it's called.
It's kind of the
There's a
same
lot
kind
of
of thing,
Cryptids, these so-called cryptids are everywhere, it seems like.
Yeah.
Seems
I
like
have
they're
a friend
interdimensional.
who believes in Yetis or Bigfoot, and I won't repeat what he said that convinced me, but I assure you he's an intelligent man, quite wealthy, owns a lot of businesses, is quite smart, and he spoke to me at length about it and convinced me that these creatures do exist. And again, I can't go into detail on that because he swore me to secrecy. Do I believe him? Yes, I believe him.
Wow.
Yeah, and
I believe in it too.
I don't believe in belief. I like hard evidence, but this man was a cut above the average and not stupid, not insane, and not crazy in any sense that I could see. And if he is, he's crazy enough to make a darn deal of money with a lot of different things like farms and houses and radio stations. So he knows what he's doing. Right. So I have to believe when he tells me something that it's true. And but that's as far as I can go. I can't say any more about that.
Well, look, the chat room, I love all the people in the chat room so much, and I was wondering if you could tell them, it's one thing I think that they might not have heard about, and that is the black-eyed kids, the BEK.
The black-eyed children?
The black-eyed children,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a hard one because we don't know if that's one of these things that just circulates on the internet and people started believing it, or if it is real. There does seem to be some evidence for them. These black-eyed children seem to show up, and they seem intrinsically evil. There was one man who called into Coast to Coast Radio. He was in a panic, and he said that these children forced him to travel back and forth in time, and every time he did, he lost a bit of his memory. And he was really upset on the show because he couldn't remember hardly anything about anyone or anything anymore. He said basically they were stealing his soul. Now, they show up, and they seem to either want help or want to give help, but usually they're asking for help. It's usually at night. They always have these dark, dark eyes. And one person who found them or met with them said that they looked like they were in the wrong time. They were in clothes from the 80s, like members-only jackets and stuff, and she said they didn't look old. The clothes looked new, fresh, as if it's something you just bought in the last few months, not something you bought 30, 40 years ago. And they tried to entice her. And she fled, basically. And they say that's what you should do. If you see these black-eyed children, they always seem to want help, want you to stop along the road, or they come to your door, and if they do, don't do it. If they have dark eyes, slam the door and pull the blinds. So, yeah, is it an internet ghost story, or is it real? I'm not sure. But there are people who are testifying to it, so you have to assume that if they're not insane or not emotionally incapacitated, that they're telling something of the truth about, or what they thought was the truth, at least. And again, with the internet, it's so hard to find facts from fiction. It's so easy to get caught up in it. And you really have to research. I did research it, and there are a number of people who actually say they witnessed it and gave their stories, different radio shows and that sort of thing. And so I believe there's something to it. How much there is to it, that I honestly can't say.
Yeah,
I do
well,
mention
I know
them.
they say they knock on the door and you have to like invite them into and they say don't invite them in if they knock on the door because you want to help them because they're kids.
Right, and of course that smacks of the vampire legend where you actually have to invite them in. Vampires can't cross your threshold unless they're invited. But so again, is that real or isn't it? But yes, they say that you shouldn't, and apparently they have something to do with time because people report that they seem to be out of our time. That this one man insisted that they were forcing it back and forth through time, and that each time he did, he lost part of his memory. He called it his soul because it was his soul, is that which made him a person, his personality. And so you have to consider, is there something like that going on, and are they really children, and who are they exactly, and where do they come from? We live in a very strange world.
Yeah, and these days
Yes,
it's
we
so
do.
hard to fake things with special effects and Photoshop and all that. You just never really know,
Right. And the internet is a minefield for that sort of thing. You've got to be so careful. It's so easy to be, to use a very ancient expression, hornswoggled. But so you
That's
have
a good
to
word.
actually have to research this and find other sources and try to find factual and physical evidence for it. Are there witnesses to the black-eyed children? Yes. Do they stand by their statements? Yes. Are there a lot of them? No, but there are some.
Mm-hmm.
So do the children exist? I'm not sure. I would like to see more evidence to support it, more witness statements.
How late, or I guess how new of a phenomenon is this whole black-eyed children thing? Has it been around for a while? Because it's kind of new to me.
It's been around a number of years, but it hasn't been around on a long-term basis.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you have to be careful. Like with regard to time travel, there's a famous guy on the internet that many believe is real. They've done multiple videos on YouTube about it. John Titor. He supposedly came from the and he's predicting events in our time. Well, number one, his predictions haven't been panning out too well. A few did, but they were something that anyone would probably have guessed. They weren't like stunning predictions, like Trump was going to be president when no one thought he was going to be, that sort of thing. But and he's been wrong more often than he's been right. And of course, he gets around that. Well, just his being here is changing the timeline. Well, that's convenient. But also, it turns out that John Titor actually was from Florida, that he had a brother who was a lawyer, that they copyrighted the name John Titor, and that they actually had written a couple of books. So it's been pretty much that he was a hoax. And yet a lot of people, because it's all over the internet and has been for so long now, think that it's real. Well, most likely it's not, because the evidence is in and it says hoax.
Yeah, there was that one footage going around that showed the little orbs creating the crop circles, which people are still showing, but the original person that created that admitted that they faked it or whatever. So, but it still goes around as if it's
driving a tractor and the little orb flying by and him apparently looking at it. Is that the one you were?
No, this one was like, it seemed like it was the early morning hours, and you can just see it right appear on the field below. It's pretty compelling.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's that one. Okay. Yeah, there's actually several like that. The one with the farmer I thought was real, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, this one here didn't have anybody in it.
Shocking that.
Yeah, it didn't have a farmer.
Yeah,
I really thought it was real.
Yeah, and of course some of these are so elaborate.
Yeah.
That you just can't imagine someone getting that done in one night, even if you had an army of people doing it. Yeah, and also, crop circles show anomalies with regard to the joints and the wheat stems, that sort of thing, and background radiation, and others don't. So you can kind of figure out which ones might be hoaxes and which ones might be real.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I think they're real. I just think that footage was faked. But yeah, I think some of them are so elaborate that there's no way, man. That's just would be
they're
impossible.
Just incredible, aren't they? And again,
and the measurements are so precise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's stunningly beautiful as well. But again, we have that woodblock cutting from the 1700s that refers to a crop circle quite clearly. You can see it in the picture. It's there and it's quite real. And apparently they thought it was the devil doing something bad, punishing that farmer or something. But it struck people enough where someone back in the 1700s, actually did a wood carving for it and put it in the paper.
Wow.
So how do we account for that? Our hoaxers of today certainly weren't around in the 1700s.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff, but if you look at it hard enough and long enough and dig for evidence, you'll usually find evidence that'll either support it or no evidence at all. As for UFOs, I think the evidence is overwhelming. They're here. And as for the Mothman, I think the evidence is pretty compelling, let me put it that way. And as for crop circles, I think not all of them are real. Certainly some are hoaxes, but I do think there's a lot that are real.
Our guest, Rob Shelsky, tonight. I appreciate you coming on here. Do you have anything coming up, Rob, that you want to tell us about or announce?
Well, there is Alien Con that's coming up in August. You can check out their site on the internet. And I am a guest presenter there, invited to attend. And that is, I believe, in late August. And it is the first Alien Con convention. And it deals specifically with subjects pertaining to UFOs and aliens, that sort of thing. So if you happen to be in Knoxville in August, you might want to drop by.
Awesome. That sounds awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll be in East City at the beginning of August. We're still trying to work out the date for that, but Knoxville's not too far away.
I believe it's for the end of August. I believe it's like the 28th or something, but I'd have to double check it. I put stuff on my calendar and then kind of ignore it until it gets closer. Also, I have books coming out as well, and there is one on the idea of quantum immortality, which will be out in about a month or so. And it's the idea of life after death and actual scientific evidence that might show that it actually does happen.
Oh, sweet.
And it will also discuss reincarnation. Yeah, it's all interesting. I love researching. I love exploring the universe, and I love researching it and trying to find actual answers. I don't want to just believe in theories. I just don't want to propound conspiracy theories. I want to look into things that are happening, like the black-eyed children, and try to find if there's any truth to it. If there is, to what extent there is, and what might be the cause. Granted, I'm not always
I like that, because I can find out from you if it really, if that really happened or not, because there's so much stuff out there, like you said, But I wanted to say really quick before everything ends that the reason that I wanted Rob to come on here was because he was on a podcast one time, and I had called in to tell him about my UFO story, and he was like the first person that really listened to me about it and asked questions and tried to get details about it and everything. And it actually helped me a lot because I felt like, oh, well, there is somebody that's really interested in it. You know what I mean? And so I appreciate that, and that was why I wanted you to come on tonight.
Well, I thank you very much for that. It's nice to have that approbation.
That's awesome. Well, I guess with this, we will wrap this up. Rob, I really appreciate it. Maybe you can come back when the book is out, and we can talk all about it.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I enjoy talking with you guys because you don't mind hopping from topic to topic, and I enjoy that, too. So,
yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, there's actually not enough time. Okay, you too, buddy. I appreciate you.
Okay, Miss Rob. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care, both of you.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Lots of love to you guys in the chat, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. If you'd like to support the work I do, go to paypal.me/UOTF. Thanks.